Missiles aren't just hitting military bases anymore. They're hitting something far more dangerous. Something that, if destroyed, doesn't just kill soldiers. It kills entire cities, entire populations, within days. Water. Right now, in the middle of the US-Israel war against Iran, water infrastructure is becoming a weapon, and the consequences of what's unfolding could reach far beyond Iran's borders, straight into the heart of the Arab world. Let me explain what's actually happening here, because the mainstream coverage is missing the most terrifying part of this story. Reports coming out of the region suggest that Israeli and American strikes on Iran have not been limited to nuclear sites or military installations. Strikes have hit, or come dangerously close to, water treatment facilities, desalination infrastructure, and critical civilian water supply networks inside Iran. Think about that for a second. Iran is not a country sitting on rivers and lakes. Large portions of the country already face severe water stress. Aquifers are depleting, rainfall has dropped, and the water treatment plants that process and deliver drinking water to millions of Iranians. Those are now reportedly in the crosshairs. Early reports suggest some facilities have already been damaged. Others have been shut down as a precautionary measure during ongoing bombardment. And in parts of Iran, water supply disruptions are already being reported. This is not collateral damage. This is a strategy. And let's be honest about what that strategy looks like on the ground. Iranian cities like Isfahan, Shiraz, and parts of Tehran are already dealing with water stress that predates this conflict. For years, environmentalists and Iranian officials have quietly warned that the country is heading toward a water crisis. Underground water tables have been dropping for decades. Rivers like the Zayandeh Red, once the lifeblood of central Iran, have run dry in stretches. Now add carpet bombing to that picture. Water treatment plants require electricity to run. They require fuel supply chains. They require engineers who aren't fleeing or hiding. Damage one part of that system, even without a direct strike on the plant itself, and the water stops flowing. Reports from inside Iran suggest that in some areas, civilians are already being told to ration water. Tanker trucks are being deployed in neighborhoods where taps have gone dry. And this is early days. This is the beginning of the disruption, not the peak of it. So when Iran's leadership looks at this situation, what do they see? They see a war being fought not just against their military, but against the basic survival of their population. And historically, when a government feels that kind of existential pressure, the response is never measured. The response is desperate. Now here's where it gets interesting, because Iran didn't stay quiet. Tehran has made something very clear to the Arab world in the past weeks. If Iran's water infrastructure is a legitimate target, then so is everyone else's. Iran has already struck, or credibly threatened to strike, water and energy infrastructure in Gulf Arab states, and the Arab world is now in a state of quiet panic that the cameras aren't fully capturing yet. Why? Because the Arab Gulf states are not just dependent on water plants, they are entirely dependent on them. Let me give you some context here, because this is where the story becomes truly alarming. The Gulf Cooperation Council, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, Oman. These countries have almost no natural freshwater, no permanent rivers, virtually no rainfall. The ground beneath them holds almost nothing drinkable. So what do? They turn seawater into drinking water through massive, enormously expensive desalination plants sitting on the coastlines of the Persian Gulf and the Red Sea. GCC countries produce over 7 billion cubic meters of freshwater every single year through desalination alone. Saudi Arabia is the largest producer of desalinated water in the entire world. The UAE gets somewhere between 80 to 90% of its drinking water from desalination. Kuwait? Close to 100%. These aren't just water plants. These are life support machines for entire nations. Destroy them, and within days, not weeks, not months, you have a humanitarian catastrophe of unimaginable scale. And Iran knows this. Now consider how long it took to build these plants. Some of the largest desalination complexes in Saudi Arabia and the UAE took 5, 6, 7 years to construct. They cost billions of dollars. They require specialized equipment, reverse osmosis membranes, high-pressure pumps, complex chemical treatment systems, most of which is manufactured in Europe, the US, and Japan. If a major plant gets destroyed tomorrow, you can't just rebuild it in 6 months. You can't even order the replacement parts quickly. Global supply chains for desalination equipment are already stretched. Lead times on critical components run into years. This is what makes water infrastructure so uniquely catastrophic as a target. You can rebuild a bridge. You can repair a road. But destroying a major desalination facility doesn't just create a water shortage today. It creates a water shortage for years, and the populations depending on these plants have no backup plan. There is no river to fall back on. There is no underground aquifer large enough to sustain a city of millions. There is only the plant and the sea. That's it. If you're finding this breakdown useful, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because this story is developing fast and we're going to keep tracking it. Now let's talk about what Iran has actually done and what it's threatening. Reports suggest Iranian-linked forces have already targeted energy and infrastructure facilities in the Gulf region. Some of these strikes appear to have been warning shots, a message more than a mission. But the message is unmistakable. You destroy our water, we destroy yours. And this is where things start to fall apart for the broader Middle East. Because the Arab states aren't Iran's enemies in this war. Most Gulf nations have been trying desperately to stay neutral. Saudi Arabia has been in diplomatic conversations. The UAE has maintained back-channel communications. These countries don't want this war. They didn't ask for it. But Iran doesn't see it that way. From Tehran's perspective, Arab silence while Israel and the US bomb Iranian cities is cooperation, and Arab desalination plants are now on the table. Think about what that means. Here's what's really happening beneath the surface. There are at least 2 or 3 ways to read this situation, and none of them are comfortable. One theory is that this is pure deterrence. Iran is making a calculation. If we make the entire region feel threatened, Arab states will pressure the US and Israel to stop. It's a hostage strategy, not of people, but of water. Another possibility is that Iran has already crossed a line it can't walk back from. That some of these strikes on Arab infrastructure weren't warnings. They were tests. Testing response times. Testing air defense. Preparing for something larger if the bombing of Iran continues. But there's also a darker explanation. One that analysts in the region are starting to whisper about. What if the water infrastructure targeting isn't just military strategy? What if it's collapse strategy? If you push the Gulf states into chaos, water shortages, civilian panic, political destabilization, you fracture the US's entire alliance structure in the region. No Gulf bases, no Gulf airspace, no Gulf cooperation. The whole American military posture in the Middle East starts to crumble. Water isn't just a weapon here. It might be the most important strategic asset in the entire conflict, and here's what makes this even more complicated. These desalination plants are not easy to defend. They're massive. They sit on coastlines. They're not buried underground like nuclear facilities. You can see them on satellite imagery from space. And they require enormous amounts of energy. Power lines, fuel supply chains, cooling systems, all of which are vulnerable in their own right. The Gulf states have invested billions in air defense, Patriot systems, THAAD, advanced radar networks, but a coordinated drone and missile swarm, the kind Iran has already demonstrated it can launch, puts enormous strain on any defense system. And if even one major desalination complex takes a serious hit, reports suggest that stockpiles of emergency water reserves in most Gulf cities would last somewhere between a few days to a couple of weeks at most. After that, you are looking at a public health emergency of a scale the modern world has rarely seen. You have to ask yourself, does anyone in Washington or Tel Aviv have a plan for that scenario? Because right now, it doesn't look like it. And zoom out for a moment. Because the global implications here are being completely ignored in most coverage. The Gulf states don't just produce water, they produce oil. They run ports. They house American military bases that are the backbone of US power projection across the entire region. If civilians in Saudi Arabia or the UAE start facing water shortages, real, sustained, daily water shortages, the internal political pressure on those governments becomes enormous. Governments that are already monarchies. Already under pressure from young populations watching a brutal war unfold next door. Already walking a tightrope between maintaining their American alliances and not being seen as complicit in the destruction of a neighboring Muslim country. Water stress doesn't just create a humanitarian crisis, it creates political instability. And political instability in the Gulf is an earthquake that the entire global economy feels, through oil prices, through shipping lanes, through financial markets that are deeply tied to Gulf sovereign wealth funds. This war started as a confrontation between Israel, the US, and Iran, but the water dimension is turning it into something that every nation on Earth has a stake in, whether they realize it yet or not. Here's what we don't know yet. We don't know the full extent of damage to Iranian water infrastructure. Iranian state media controls that narrative tightly, and independent verification is nearly impossible right now. We don't know whether Iran's threats against Arab facilities are bluffs or active operational plans. We don't know whether the Gulf states have privately communicated red lines to Tehran or whether Tehran is listening. And we don't know whether the US and Israel factored this regional water crisis into their strategic calculations before launching this campaign. The silence from Washington on this specific issue is itself telling. What we do know is this. A line has been crossed that is very difficult to uncross when water becomes a weapon. When civilian life support infrastructure becomes a target, wars stop being about military victory and start being about survival. Iran is fighting for survival. They will use every tool available. The Arab states are watching their own survival infrastructure get drawn into a war they wanted no part of. And millions of ordinary people, in Iran, in Saudi Arabia, in the UAE, in Kuwait, are now one bad decision away from waking up and turning on a tap that produces nothing. The missiles will stop eventually. Wars always end. But if the infrastructure that keeps these populations alive gets destroyed first, the consequences won't end when the bombs stop falling. They'll be living with them for decades. And if this continues on its current trajectory, we may be watching the beginning of a water crisis that makes every other crisis in this region look manageable by comparison. Stay close to this story, because it's only getting started.